Welcome to Monk's Temple. Let us begin by simply breathing. Feel the air entering your body, filling your lungs, and then releasing. This simple act of breathing connects you to something that has been with you since your very first moment in this world. It is the most basic rhythm of being alive. And yet, how often do we forget to notice it? How often do we rush through our days without pausing to feel this fundamental miracle? Today we are going to explore something that lives deep within almost every human heart. It is a whisper that grows louder as the years pass. It is a shadow that lengthens as the sun of our lives moves across the sky. It is the feeling that arises when you look in the mirror and notice a new line on your face. It is the quiet panic when you realize you are no longer the youngest person in the room. It is the fear that catches you off guard in the middle of the night when you cannot sleep and your mind begins to wander toward the future. I am scared of getting older. We rarely say these words out loud. We dress them up in other clothes. We call it a midlife crisis. We call it nostalgia. We call it worrying about our appearance or feeling irrelevant at work. But underneath all these masks, the same fear breathes. It is the fear of impermanence. It is the fear that everything we are and everything we love will eventually fade away like morning mist under the rising sun. Modern psychology has a name for this. It is called mortality salience. It is the awareness that death is inevitable, and this awareness creates a deep, often unconscious anxiety. To cope with this anxiety, we build what psychologists call terror management theory. We construct meaning systems. We cling to our identities. We try to leave our mark on the world. We chase achievements and accumulate possessions, hoping that somehow these things will outlast us and prove that our existence mattered. But here is the problem. No matter how high we build these towers of meaning, the shadow of impermanence continues to fall across them. No matter how tightly we grip, the sand of time continues to slip through our fingers. And so the fear remains, sometimes buried so deep we forget it is there, sometimes rising to the surface with overwhelming force. This is where the ancient wisdom of Buddhism enters our conversation like a gentle lamp in a dark room. The Buddha was not merely a spiritual figure sitting on a mountaintop dispensing abstract teachings. He was a profound psychologist. He was a doctor of the human condition. He looked at human suffering with the same precision that a physician looks at a patient. He diagnosed the disease, and he prescribed a path toward healing. And what did he identify as the root of our suffering? It was not aging itself. It was not sickness. It was not even death. The root of our suffering, he taught, is our relationship with these realities. It is our desperate clinging to things that are by their very nature impermanent. It is our refusal to accept the fundamental law of change that governs all of existence. Let me share with you a story that illustrates this teaching. There was once a woman named Margaret who had spent her entire career as a concert pianist. Her hands had moved across the keys with astonishing speed and precision. Audiences had risen to their feet in applause. Critics had written glowing reviews. Her identity was completely woven together with her music. When Margaret reached her 70s, arthritis began to visit her hands like an uninvited guest that refused to leave. First it was just a stiffness in the mornings. Then it became a persistent ache. Finally, it grew into a limitation she could no longer ignore. She could no longer play the fast passages. She could no longer perform the pieces that had defined her career. Margaret fell into a deep depression. She stopped visiting her piano. She closed the lid and let dust collect on the keys. She told her friends that the best part of her life was over. She felt that without her music, she was nobody. One day, her young granddaughter came to visit. The girl was 6 years old and had never heard her grandmother play. She opened the piano and begged Margaret to play something, anything. Reluctantly, Margaret sat down. Her stiff fingers found the keys. She could not play the fast, complex pieces anymore. So instead, she played simple lullabies. She played the songs her own mother had sung to her. She played slowly, tenderly, with a depth of feeling that her younger, faster fingers had never possessed. The granddaughter sat entranced. When Margaret finished, the girl said something that changed everything. She said, "Grandma, your music sounds like hugs." In that moment, Margaret understood something she had missed for years. Her value had never been in her speed or her technical precision. Her value had never been in the applause of audiences or the praise of critics. Her value was in the feeling she could create, in the love she could transmit through her hands. And that feeling, that love, had not diminished with age. It had deepened. The fear of aging is often the fear that we are losing our usefulness, our relevance, our identity. But what if aging is not a taking away? What if it is a revealing? What if the slower, quieter, gentler version of ourselves is not a lesser version but simply a different expression of the same essential being? The Buddha taught that we suffer because we cling to fixed ideas of who we are. We create a mental photograph of ourselves at what we consider our peak, and then we spend the rest of our lives trying to match that photograph. But life is not a photograph. Life is a moving picture. It is a river that never stops flowing. The person you were 10 years ago is not the same person sitting here today. Every cell in your body has been replaced. Every thought has shifted. Every experience has left its trace. So who are you really? This is the question Buddhism invites you to explore. And the answer may surprise you. Before we go deeper, I want to pause here and invite you to reflect on Margaret's story. She spent decades believing she was her ability to play fast and perfectly. When that ability changed, she believed she had lost herself. But her granddaughter saw something Margaret could not see. She saw the essence that remained long after the surface had transformed. This is the first psychological insight Buddhism offers us. We confuse what we do with who we are. We confuse our roles with our essence. We confuse the temporary with the timeless. And this confusion is the breeding ground for the fear of aging. Let me offer you another story, this time about a man named David. David was a corporate executive who had climbed the ladder with determination and sacrifice. He had missed birthdays and anniversaries. He had worked weekends and late nights. He had done everything required to reach the pinnacle of his profession. And he succeeded. By age 55, he was the CEO of a major company. Then came the retirement party. There was a gold watch and a standing ovation. There were speeches about his legacy. And then David went home to a house that felt too quiet. The emails stopped coming. The phone stopped ringing. The identity he had spent 35 years building evaporated almost overnight. David began to experience what psychologists call role loss. When our primary social role disappears, we can feel as though we have disappeared along with it. David felt invisible. He felt useless. He felt like a ghost walking through a world that no longer needed him. The fear of aging had transformed into the fear of irrelevance. David tried to fill the void. He took up golf. He joined a book club. He volunteered at a local charity. But nothing seemed to stick. Nothing felt meaningful. He would lie awake at night staring at the ceiling, wondering what the point of it all had been. Was it just to accumulate a gold watch and a standing ovation? Was that all a life amounted to? One evening, David's teenage grandson came to him with a problem. The boy was struggling with a difficult decision about which college to attend. He was torn between following his passion for art and pursuing a more practical degree in business. David sat with the boy and listened. He did not offer easy answers. Instead, he shared stories from his own life. He talked about the roads not taken. He talked about the sacrifices he had made and what they had cost him. He talked about what he had learned and what he still wondered about. The conversation lasted for hours. When it ended, the grandson hugged him and said, "Grandpa, I never knew you thought about things like this. I always just saw you as the CEO. Now I see you as a person." In that moment, David understood something crucial. His role as CEO had been visible to everyone. It had come with a title and a parking space and a salary. But his role as a human being, as a source of wisdom and connection, had always been there, invisible and unnoticed. The retirement that took away his title had not taken away his humanity. It had simply removed the mask that had been hiding it. The Buddha spoke about something called the two arrows. The first arrow is the unavoidable pain of life. For David, the first arrow was the end of his career. This was a real event with real consequences. The second arrow is the story we add on top of the pain. For David, the second arrow was the belief that he was now worthless, that his life was over, that he had become a ghost. The Buddha taught that while we cannot always avoid the first arrow, we can absolutely stop shooting ourselves with the second arrow. The first arrow is life. The second arrow is our interpretation of life. The first arrow is the fact. The second arrow is the fiction we build around the fact. David's conversation with his grandson helped him see the second arrow. He realized that his suffering was not coming from his retirement. It was coming from the story he was telling himself about retirement. The story said, "Without a title, you are nobody." The story said, "Without a role, you are invisible." But his grandson had just shown him that this story was false. He was not invisible. He was more visible than ever, seen now not as a function but as a human being. Modern psychology confirms this ancient insight. Cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most effective approaches to treating anxiety and depression, is built on the idea that our thoughts create our feelings, not external events. The event is neutral. The meaning we assign to the event determines whether we suffer or thrive. David had assigned the meaning of catastrophe to his retirement. He had told himself a horror story. When he began to question that story, when he saw evidence that contradicted it, the horror began to dissolve. He was still retired. The first arrow remained. But the second arrow, the one he had been shooting into his own heart day after day, finally lost its power. This is the work Buddhism invites us to do. Not to deny the reality of aging, but to examine the stories we tell ourselves about aging. Not to pretend we do not feel fear, but to look closely at what the fear is actually made of. Let us sit with this idea of stories for a moment longer. Your mind is constantly narrating. It is telling you who you are, what you need, what you should fear, what you should hope for. This narrator never stops. Even now, as you listen to these words, there is a voice in your head commenting, agreeing, disagreeing, wandering off, coming back. Buddhism calls this voice the thinking mind. And one of its most persistent stories is the story of self. The self is the character at the center of your internal novel. It has a past, a present, and a future. It has qualities and flaws. It has achievements and failures. It has hopes and fears. Now here is the crucial insight. The self is a story. It is not a thing. It is a collection of memories, beliefs, and predictions held together by the thinking mind. And like all stories, it changes over time. The self you were at 10 is not the self you are now. The self you will be at 80 will not be the self you are today. The fear of aging is the fear that something bad will happen to the main character of your story. You are afraid that this character will lose its beauty, its strength, its relevance. You are afraid that this character will suffer and eventually die. You are so deeply identified with this character that its fate feels like your fate. But what if you are not the character? What if you are the one reading the story? What if you are the awareness in which the story appears? Let me offer you a metaphor. Imagine you are in a movie theater. The lights dim. The screen lights up. A story begins to unfold. There are heroes and villains, triumphs and tragedies, joy and sorrow. You sit in your seat, completely absorbed. You laugh. You cry. You grip the armrest during tense moments. For 2 hours, you forget you are in a theater. You become the story. Then the movie ends. The lights come up. You look around and remember where you are. You were never actually on that screen. You were always in the seat, watching. The emotions were real, but the story was not your story. Buddhism suggests that life is like this movie. The self is the character on the screen. It has adventures and misadventures. It changes and grows. It is born and it dies. But you are not that character. You are the awareness watching the character. You are the screen on which the entire drama unfolds. And that awareness, that screen, does not age. It does not change. It simply holds everything, the young self and the old self, the triumphs and the sorrows, without being touched by any of it. This is not just poetry. This is a direct experience available to anyone who learns to look inward. When you sit quietly and observe your thoughts, you will notice something remarkable. The thoughts come and go. The feelings rise and fall. The sensations appear and disappear. But the one noticing all of this, the awareness itself, remains constant. It is like the sky that holds clouds without being stained by them. The clouds come and go. The sky remains. The fear of aging is a cloud. It passes through your awareness, dark and threatening. But you are the sky. You can hold this cloud without becoming it. You can watch it without being consumed by it. This is the beginning of freedom. I would like to invite you now to take a moment and try a small experiment. If you feel comfortable, close your eyes. Take a few deep breaths. Now bring to mind a memory from your childhood. Any memory will do. See it in your mind's eye. Notice the details, the colors, the feelings. Now ask yourself, who is the one seeing this memory? The memory is from decades ago. The child in the memory is long gone. But the one witnessing the memory right now, the awareness that can reach back across the years and touch that moment, where is that awareness located? How old is that awareness? You will find that the awareness has no age. It is not young or old. It is simply present, always now, always available. The child in the memory is a collection of mental images. But the awareness that sees those images is not an image. It is not a memory. It is the timeless space in which all memories appear. This is what the Buddha pointed to when he spoke of our true nature. He did not say we should deny the reality of the body or the mind. The body ages. The mind changes. These are facts. But he also said that we are not merely the body and the mind. We are that which knows the body and the mind. We are the knower. And the knower is not touched by time. Now let me share a story about a woman who discovered this for herself. Her name was Helen. She was 93 years old and lived in a small room in an assisted living facility. Her body was frail. Her eyesight was nearly gone. Her hearing required aids. By any external measure, her life had shrunk to almost nothing. The nurses who cared for her saw only a fragile old woman waiting for the end. But Helen had a secret. She had practiced meditation for over 60 years. And in her tiny room, with its single window looking out at a brick wall, she had discovered something that the nurses could not see. She had discovered that the awareness within her was vast and luminous. It was not confined to her failing body. It was not limited by her dimming eyes. It was as infinite as the sky. One day a young volunteer came to visit her. The volunteer was studying psychology and wanted to understand how people cope with aging. She asked Helen if she was afraid of dying. Helen smiled. Her eyes, clouded with cataracts, seemed to look through the young woman rather than at her. She said, "My dear, dying is just taking off a shoe that has become too tight. It is not something to fear. It is something to release." The volunteer was stunned. She had expected to hear about fear and regret. Instead, she heard about freedom. She asked Helen how she had arrived at such peace. Helen said, "For most of my life, I thought I was this body. When the body ached, I ached. When the body weakened, I weakened. But then I began to look more closely. I began to ask who was feeling the ache. And I discovered that the one feeling the ache was not in pain. The ache was in the body. The awareness of the ache was perfectly still, perfectly untouched. The body was a cloud passing through the sky of my awareness. And the sky was not bothered by the cloud." This is the discovery that awaits each of us. It is not something you need to earn or achieve. It is simply the truth of what you already are. You are the sky. The clouds of aging, sickness, and death will come and go. But the sky remains. Before we go further, I want to invite you to do something. If you are in a place where you can, place your hand on your heart. Just feel the warmth of your palm against your chest. Feel the gentle rhythm of your heartbeat if you can detect it. This heart has been beating since before you were born. It has beaten through every joy and every sorrow. It has beaten through every celebration and every loss. It has never stopped. It has never taken a day off. It has served you with perfect loyalty for every moment of your existence. Now consider this. The heart does not care how old you are. It does not decide to beat less faithfully because you have wrinkles or gray hair. It simply continues, moment after moment, doing what it does. There is something in this that mirrors the deeper truth we are exploring. Beneath all the changes, beneath all the aging, there is something that continues. There is something that does not waver. The Buddha called this something awareness. It is not a thing you can hold or see. It is not a possession you can lose. It is the one thing you can never lose because it is what you are. Let me share with you a story about a man named Robert. Robert was a carpenter. He had worked with wood his entire life. His hands knew the feel of grain and the weight of tools. He could look at a pile of lumber and see the table hidden inside it. His identity was woven into his craft. When Robert turned 70, his hands began to shake. At first it was barely noticeable. Then it became impossible to ignore. He could no longer make the precise cuts his work required. He could no longer trust his hands to do what his mind commanded. Robert stopped working. He sold his tools. He closed his workshop. And then he sat in his house and waited. He waited for something to happen. He waited for a reason to get out of bed. He waited for a purpose to find him. Months passed. Robert's wife watched him fade. She watched the light go out of his eyes. She watched him shrink into himself like an old photograph left in the sun. One day, Robert's young grandson came to visit. The boy was 7 years old and full of questions. He had heard stories about his grandfather's skill with wood. He asked Robert to teach him something, anything about carpentry. Robert looked at his shaking hands. He looked at the boy's eager face. He wanted to say no. He wanted to say he was useless now. But something in the boy's eyes made him pause. Robert took the boy to the garage where his tools sat covered in dust. He picked up a piece of scrap wood. His hands shook as he held it. But then he began to talk. He talked about how to choose the right wood. He talked about how to read the grain. He talked about the patience required to let the wood reveal itself. He talked about the satisfaction of creating something with your own hands. The boy listened with complete attention. He did not care about the shaking hands. He did not care about the slowed movements. He cared only about the wisdom flowing from his grandfather. By the end of the afternoon, something had shifted in Robert. He realized that his hands had never been the real source of his gift. The real gift was in his mind, in his experience, in the decades of knowledge stored like seasoned wood in the barn of his consciousness. He could no longer build tables. But he could build carpenters. He could pass on what he knew. This is a form of what Buddhism calls transformation. The outer form changes. The hands fail. The body weakens. But the essence, the wisdom, the capacity to give, these do not diminish. They simply find new expression. The fear of aging often comes from identifying too strongly with the outer form. We think we are our hands, our faces, our abilities. When these change, we think we are disappearing. But the truth is that we are simply being invited to express ourselves differently. The river does not stop flowing when it leaves the mountains and enters the plains. It simply flows differently. It becomes wider, slower, deeper. It nourishes different lands. It reflects the sky in a new way. Modern psychology has a concept called post-traumatic growth. It is the idea that difficult experiences, including the losses that come with aging, can actually lead to psychological development. People who face adversity often emerge with greater wisdom, deeper relationships, a clearer sense of what matters, and a renewed appreciation for life. The suffering does not destroy them. It transforms them. Robert experienced this. The loss of his physical ability forced him to discover a different kind of giving. He had spent his life building things from wood. Now he was building something far more lasting. He was building understanding in a young mind. He was building connection across generations. He was building legacy not in the form of objects but in the form of transmitted wisdom. The Buddha would recognize this as skillful means. It is the ability to adapt one's expression to changing circumstances. The wise person does not cling to the old way of being. The wise person asks, given what is true now, how can I best serve? How can I best express the love and wisdom that live within me? This question is always available. No matter how old you are, no matter what limitations you face, you can ask it. And when you ask it sincerely, an answer will arise. It may not be the answer you expected. It may not look like anything you have done before. But it will be your answer. It will be the next expression of your essential nature. Let us pause here and breathe together. Just for a moment, let your attention rest on the sensation of breathing. Feel the cool air entering your nostrils. Feel the warm air leaving. There is no need to control it. No need to deepen it. Just let it be exactly as it is. This breath is the only breath you have. The past breath is gone. The future breath has not arrived. This one, right now, is your life. This simple act of paying attention to the breath is a form of meditation. It is also a form of resistance to the fear of aging. Why? Because when you are fully present with this breath, you are not in the past regretting what has been lost. You are not in the future fearing what is to come. You are here, now, alive, breathing. And in this moment, you are complete. The Buddha taught that the present moment is the only moment that actually exists. The past is memory. The future is imagination. Only this moment is real. And yet, we spend most of our lives living in the past and future. We rehearse old grievances. We replay old triumphs. We worry about what hasn't happened yet. We plan for scenarios that may never come. The fear of aging is almost entirely a future-oriented fear. It is about what will happen. It is about the body that will decline. It is about the independence that will be lost. It is about the death that will come. None of these things exist now. They exist only as thoughts, as mental images, as predictions. But we treat these thoughts as if they were reality. We suffer today over events that have not happened and may never happen as we imagine. Let me tell you a story about a woman named Patricia who discovered this truth in a surprising way. Patricia was 58 years old and terrified of turning 60. The number itself felt like a threat. 60 meant old. 60 meant over the hill. 60 meant the beginning of the end. As her 59th birthday approached, she became increasingly anxious. She could not sleep. She could not concentrate. She felt as though a dark cloud was following her everywhere. Her daughter, noticing her distress, invited her to spend a weekend at a small cabin in the mountains. Patricia agreed, hoping the change of scenery might help. On the first morning, they went for a walk in the forest. The air was crisp. The sunlight filtered through the trees. It was beautiful. But Patricia could not enjoy it. Her mind was stuck on the approaching birthday. Her daughter stopped walking and turned to face her. She said, "Mom, look at this tree." She pointed to an ancient oak with a trunk so wide two people could not wrap their arms around it. "This tree is probably 200 years old. Does it look worried about turning 200? Does it spend its days dreading the next year?" Patricia had to laugh. Of course the tree did not worry. It simply stood there, putting out leaves in spring, losing them in autumn, weathering storms, soaking up sun, doing what trees do. Her daughter continued. "The tree does not know how old it is. It does not count the years. It does not compare itself to younger trees. It just lives. It just grows. It just is. The only thing that makes your age painful is the meaning you attach to it. The number itself is neutral. The story you tell about the number is what hurts." This conversation was a turning point for Patricia. She began to see that her suffering was self-created. She was not suffering from turning 60. She was suffering from the meaning she had assigned to turning 60. She had decided that 60 was a catastrophe. But was it really? Was there any actual catastrophe happening? Her body was healthy. Her mind was sharp. Her relationships were strong. The only catastrophe was in her imagination. The Buddha taught that our thoughts are like artists painting pictures on the canvas of the mind. Some of these pictures are beautiful and bring us peace. Others are terrifying and bring us suffering. But all of them are just pictures. They are not reality. They are representations of reality, filtered through our fears and desires. The practice of mindfulness is the practice of seeing these pictures for what they are. It is learning to recognize a fearful thought as just a thought, not as a truth. It is watching the mind create its stories without automatically believing them. It is like sitting in a movie theater and knowing you are watching a film, even when the film is scary. When Patricia returned home, she began a simple practice. Every time she noticed herself worrying about age, she would pause and ask herself, "Is this thought true? Is it really true that 60 means the end? Is it really true that I should be afraid?" And she would wait for an answer. Almost always, the answer was no. The thought was just a thought. It was an old habit, a conditioned response, not a reflection of reality. This is not about positive thinking. It is not about pretending everything is wonderful. It is about seeing clearly. It is about distinguishing between what is actually happening and what the mind is adding on top of what is happening. The first arrow is what is happening. The second arrow is the mind's addition. Our practice is to stop shooting the second arrow. I want to share with you a teaching from the Buddha that is often misunderstood. It is the teaching on impermanence. Many people hear this word and feel a sense of sadness. They think impermanence means everything ends, so life is tragic. But this is not what the Buddha intended. He taught impermanence not to depress us but to free us. Think about it this way. If everything were permanent, nothing could change. If nothing could change, suffering could never end. If nothing could change, you would be stuck forever with every pain, every regret, every limitation. But because everything is impermanent, because everything is constantly in flux, there is always the possibility of transformation. The fear you feel right now is impermanent. It will pass. The grief you carry is impermanent. It will shift. The body you worry about losing is impermanent. It was never yours to keep. Impermanence is not a curse. It is the very mechanism of life. It is what allows seeds to become flowers. It is what allows wounds to heal. It is what allows wisdom to grow. Without impermanence, there would be no growth, no learning, no evolution. You would be frozen forever in whatever state you happen to be in. Let me tell you a story about a man named Frank who learned to embrace impermanence. Frank was a commercial airline pilot. For 40 years, his life was defined by takeoffs and landings, by the view of clouds from above, by the responsibility of carrying hundreds of passengers safely through the sky. He loved his work with a passion that never dimmed. When Frank turned 65, he was required to retire. There was no choice. The regulations were clear. He would never sit in a cockpit again. The loss was devastating. He felt as though the ground had been pulled out from under him. He had spent 4 decades looking at the world from above. Now he was stuck on the ground, and the ground felt small and cramped. Frank fell into a depression that lasted nearly 2 years. He stopped seeing his friends. He stopped leaving the house. He sat in his living room and watched the sky, waiting for something that would never come. Then one day, his daughter brought him a gift. It was a small drone with a camera. She said, "Dad, you can't fly planes anymore. But you can still see the world from above. You can still find that perspective." Frank was skeptical at first. A drone seemed like a toy compared to a Boeing 747. But he took it to a nearby park and launched it. As the drone rose into the air, as the camera feed showed him the treetops and the rooftops, something shifted inside him. He was not piloting a massive aircraft. But he was seeing the world from above again. He was finding the perspective he had missed. Over time, Frank became obsessed with his drone. He learned to capture stunning aerial footage. He started a YouTube channel sharing his videos. He connected with other drone enthusiasts. He found a new community, a new purpose, a new way of expressing his love for the view from above. Frank had not lost his passion. He had simply lost one form of expressing it. Because he was willing to embrace impermanence, because he was willing to let go of the old form, a new form could arise. The pilot became a photographer. The captain became an artist. The same essence found new expression. This is the wisdom of impermanence. It is not about holding on tighter. It is about learning to flow. It is about trusting that when one door closes, another opens. It is about knowing that the energy that animated your youth does not disappear when your youth ends. It simply takes new shapes. The fear of aging is the fear of losing the shapes we know. We love the shape of our face without wrinkles. We love the shape of our body without limitations. We love the shape of our role as parent or professional or provider. When these shapes begin to change, we panic. We think we are losing ourselves. But we are not the shapes. We are the clay that takes the shapes. The clay does not disappear when one shape is replaced by another. It simply reforms. It becomes something new. And the new shape, if we can welcome it, has its own beauty, its own purpose, its own reason for being. Modern psychology has a term for this. It is called psychological flexibility. It is the ability to adapt to changing circumstances without losing your sense of self. People with high psychological flexibility navigate life transitions more smoothly. They suffer less. They bounce back faster. They find meaning in new situations. Psychological flexibility is exactly what Buddhism has been cultivating for millennia. It is the willingness to let go of old identities and embrace new ones. It is the understanding that you are not any of your identities. You are the one who wears identities like clothes, changing them as the seasons change. Frank learned this. He learned that he was not a pilot. He was someone who loved seeing the world from above. When being a pilot was no longer possible, he found another way to express that love. The love remained. Only the expression changed. What is it that remains unchanged in you? What is the love that has animated your life? Is it a love of teaching? A love of creating? A love of connecting with others? A love of learning? Whatever it is, that love is not dependent on any particular form. It can find new expression at any age. The forms will change. The love will remain. I want to share something with you that may feel uncomfortable at first. It is a teaching the Buddha offered to his disciples, and it is perhaps the most direct medicine for the fear of aging. He taught them to contemplate the natural stages of the body. He encouraged them to visualize the body growing old, growing sick, and eventually decaying. This sounds morbid, doesn't it? Why would anyone choose to think about such things? The answer is surprising. The Buddha taught this not to create fear but to dissolve it. He understood that we fear what we refuse to look at. The monster under the bed is terrifying only as long as we keep the lights off. When we finally turn on the light and look, we see there is no monster. There is only a pile of laundry or a forgotten shoe. The same is true of aging and death. As long as we push these realities away, as long as we pretend they are not coming, they grow in power. They become monstrous. They haunt us from the shadows. But when we turn toward them, when we look at them directly with curiosity and courage, something shifts. They lose their power to terrify. They become simply what they are, natural processes, inevitable but not monstrous. Let me tell you a story about a woman named Grace who discovered this for herself. Grace was a former model. In her 20s and 30s, her face had appeared on magazine covers. Her body had been photographed by the world's most famous fashion photographers. Her identity was built on her appearance. She was beautiful, and the world told her this was her greatest asset. Now in her 60s, Grace struggled deeply with the changes in her face and body. She spent thousands of dollars on creams and procedures. She avoided mirrors when possible and scrutinized them obsessively when she could not. She was at war with her own reflection. A friend suggested she try a meditation retreat focused on compassion. Grace was skeptical but desperate enough to try anything. At the retreat, the teacher gave an unexpected instruction. He asked everyone to spend an hour looking at their own hands. Not judging them. Not wishing they were different. Just looking. Noticing the lines, the spots, the veins, the way the skin had thinned and wrinkled. Just looking with curiosity, as if seeing these hands for the first time. Grace found this exercise almost unbearable. Her hands showed her age more clearly than any other part of her. She wanted to hide them, not study them. But she followed the instruction. She looked. She noticed the map of lines crossing her palms. She noticed the spots that had appeared over the years. She noticed the way the skin moved differently than it had when she was young. And then something unexpected happened. As she looked without judgment, as she simply observed, she began to feel something she had not felt toward her aging body in years. She began to feel tenderness. These hands had held her children. They had prepared thousands of meals. They had touched the faces of people she loved. They had done so much, given so much, served so faithfully. And all she had done for years was criticize them. Grace began to cry. Not tears of sorrow, but tears of recognition. She saw that her war against aging was a war against her own life. Every line was a record of a smile. Every spot was a memory of time spent in the sun. Every wrinkle was a testament to years of expression, of feeling, of being alive. Her face was not a deteriorating version of her 20-year-old face. It was a completely different thing. It was a face that had lived. The Buddha's teaching on contemplating the body is not about developing disgust. It is about developing intimacy. It is about befriending the body exactly as it is, not as we wish it to be. It is about recognizing that this body has served you faithfully for decades. It has carried you through every joy and every sorrow. It deserves your gratitude, not your contempt. Modern psychology confirms the wisdom of this approach. Body image issues, which affect people of all ages but become particularly acute as we age, are rooted in a disconnection from the body. We see the body as an object to be evaluated rather than a living process to be experienced. We stand outside ourselves, judging. The path to healing is to come back inside, to feel the body from within, to appreciate it for what it does rather than condemn it for how it looks. Grace's experience at the retreat was the beginning of a profound shift. She did not suddenly love every wrinkle. But she stopped fighting. She stopped the war. And in the absence of war, something like peace became possible. She could look in the mirror now and see not an enemy but an old friend, weathered by time but still present, still here, still alive. Before we continue, I want to invite you again to simply breathe. Feel the air moving in and out of your body. Notice how each breath is complete in itself. The inhale does not cling to the exhale. The exhale does not resist its own ending. They flow into each other naturally, without effort, without fear. This is the rhythm of life itself. This is the rhythm you are part of. Now I want to share with you a teaching from the Buddha that is often called the 3 marks of existence. These are the 3 characteristics that apply to all of life. The first is impermanence, which we have already explored. The second is suffering or dissatisfaction, the recognition that clinging to impermanent things inevitably leads to pain. The third is not self, the teaching that there is no permanent, unchanging self to be found anywhere. This third mark, not self, is the most subtle and the most liberating. It is the recognition that the thing you call me is not a fixed entity. It is a process. It is a flowing collection of thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions, all arising and passing away in rapid succession. There is no permanent owner of these experiences. There is just the experiencing itself. Let me tell you a story about a man named Arthur who encountered this teaching in a very practical way. Arthur was a historian. He had spent his entire adult life studying the past. He knew more about the Roman Empire than almost anyone alive. He had written books and given lectures and advised museums. His identity was completely wrapped up in his knowledge. He was the expert. He was the authority. As Arthur entered his 80s, his memory began to fade. At first it was small things, names he could not recall, dates that slipped away. Then it became more significant. He would lose his train of thought mid-sentence. He would forget appointments. He would struggle to remember events from his own life. The decline was terrifying for Arthur. He felt that he was losing himself. If his knowledge was disappearing, what was left? Who was he without his expertise? He became depressed and withdrawn. He stopped attending academic conferences. He stopped answering letters from colleagues. He felt like a library whose books were slowly crumbling into dust. Arthur's daughter, who was a therapist, tried to help him see things differently. She said, "Dad, you spent your whole life studying the past. You know better than anyone that nothing lasts. The Roman Empire fell. The great libraries of Alexandria burned. Every civilization eventually fades. Why should your mind be any different?" Arthur knew she was right intellectually, but emotionally he was devastated. He could not accept that his own mind, the instrument through which he had understood the world, was failing him. One day, Arthur was sitting in his garden, feeling sorry for himself. A young boy from next door climbed over the fence to retrieve a lost ball. He saw Arthur and asked what he was doing. Arthur said, "I'm forgetting things. I'm losing my mind." The boy looked at him with the honest curiosity of a child. He said, "But you're still here. You're still sitting in your garden. You're still talking to me. If you're losing your mind, who is it that's still here?" Arthur had no answer. But the question lodged in him like a seed. Who was still here? If his memories were fading, if his knowledge was dissolving, if the expert was disappearing, what remained? He sat with this question for days, weeks, months. And gradually, an answer began to emerge. What remained was awareness itself. The memories came and went, but the one noticing their coming and going remained. The knowledge faded, but the one noticing the fading remained. The expert identity crumbled, but the one watching the crumbling remained. That one, the watcher, had no age. It had no memories to lose. It had no expertise to fade. It was simply present, simply aware, simply here. Arthur began to practice resting in this awareness. When a memory slipped away, he noticed the slipping. When he could not recall a name, he noticed the not recalling. The content of his mind was increasingly unreliable, but the awareness of that content was perfectly clear. And that awareness, he realized, was his true home. This is the teaching of not-self. It is not a denial of your existence. It is a redefinition. It is an invitation to stop identifying with what changes and to start identifying with what does not. The waves on the surface of the ocean change constantly. But the ocean itself, the vast depth from which the waves arise, does not change. You are the ocean. You have always been the ocean. You just forgot. Modern psychology is beginning to explore something similar through the concept of the observing self. This is the part of consciousness that can step back and witness thoughts, feelings, and sensations without being caught up in them. The observing self does not change. It does not age. It is the same at 80 as it was at 8. It is the constant witness of a constantly changing life. Arthur discovered his observing self in the garden, through the question of a child. He discovered that he was not his memories. He was not his expertise. He was not his identity. He was the awareness in which all of these appeared and disappeared. And that awareness was untouched by time. We have traveled a long way together in this monk's temple. We have explored stories and teachings. We have sat with fears and questions. And now we arrive at the final part of our journey. I want to leave you with something the Buddha said shortly before his death. His beloved disciple Ananda was weeping at the thought of losing his teacher. The Buddha said, "Enough, Ananda. Do not weep. Have I not taught you that we must part from everything we hold dear? That which is born carries within it the seeds of its own dissolution. How could it be otherwise?" These are not cold words. They point toward a freedom that grief cannot touch. Separation is built into the fabric of existence. Everything that comes together will eventually come apart. Every birth contains a death. This is not a flaw. This is the design itself. And yet, within this design, there is something that does not come and go. There is something that is not born and does not die. That something is what you are in your deepest essence. It is the awareness that has been reading these words, that has been following these stories. It has not aged 1 second since we began. It will not age 1 second after we end. Let me tell you one final story. It is about a woman named Beatrice who lived to be 104 years old. She was interviewed on her 100th birthday and asked the secret to her long life. She laughed and said, "I don't have a secret. I just kept waking up." Then she grew serious. She said, "When I was young, I was terrified of getting old. I thought old meant ugly and useless and alone. I spent so many years fighting it, dreading it, trying to hold it back. And then one day I realized something. All my fighting was just making me miserable in the present. I was so busy fearing the future that I was missing my life." She continued. "So I stopped fighting. I just let myself be whatever age I was. When I was 60, I was 60. When I was 70, I was 70. When I was 80, I was 80. Each age had its own gifts. Each decade brought something new. The only thing I lost by fighting was peace. The only thing I gained by accepting was freedom. Beatrice lived another 4 years. On her 104th birthday, she gathered her family. She told them she was ready to go. She said, "I have loved being here. I have loved every single one of you. But the tide is going out now, and I am ready to go with it. Do not be sad. I am not disappearing. I am just returning to where I came from. You cannot lose what was never yours to keep." She died peacefully that night, surrounded by the people she loved. Her body stopped breathing. But the love she gave, the wisdom she shared, the presence she offered, all of that continues. It continues in her children and her grandchildren. It continues in the stories they tell. And on a deeper level, the awareness that was Beatrice, the consciousness that looked out through her eyes for 104 years, that awareness did not die. It returned to the vast, undivided awareness from which it never truly departed. This is what the Buddha pointed to. This is what all the teachings are ultimately about. Not making you less afraid of death, but showing you that what you really are was never born and cannot die. Not comforting you about the loss of youth, but revealing that you were never the youth that was lost. Not giving you strategies to cope with aging, but inviting you to discover the ageless one that has been watching the aging process all along. So here we are at the end. The voice will stop speaking. The words will fade. But you, the one who has been listening, the one who has been aware of these words, you do not fade. You do not end. You are the context in which all of this appears. You are the sky, not the clouds. You are the ocean, not the waves. You are the awareness in which the entire drama of your life unfolds. The fear of getting older is real. It is a powerful force in the human heart. But it is a force that can be met with understanding. It is a fear that can be dissolved by wisdom. It is a shadow that vanishes when the light of awareness is turned upon it. You have spent this time in Monk's Temple exploring this fear. Now it is time to take what you have learned into your life. Not as beliefs to cling to, but as questions to carry. When you notice yourself fearing the next birthday, pause. Ask yourself, who is it that fears? When you catch yourself mourning the face you used to have, pause. Ask yourself, who is it that mourns? When you feel anxiety about what is to come, pause. Ask yourself, who is it that is anxious? Keep asking. Keep looking. Keep turning the light of awareness inward. And one day you will see. You will see that what you have been seeking has always been what you are. You will see that what you have been fearing was never real. You will see that you are not a wave afraid of crashing. You are the ocean, vast and deep and utterly at peace. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your presence. May your journey be peaceful. May your fears be gentle teachers. May you discover the timeless awareness that has always been your true home. This is Monk's Temple, and we are always here for you.